case you're wondering, the lady in that news clip is the daughter of John and Carol Stanley, who attend here. And well, nothing is more evident these days than this world needs help. And whether you're Republican or Democrat or black and white or young or old or rich or poor, you're not going to disagree with that. No one's saying that the world's just fine. Y'all just relax. It's good. Things are going well. Whether it's the world or the country or the county or maybe even your personal life, you just know that there's need. And there's only so much the government, the military, the United Nations, or sometimes even the church, there's only so much that we can do. And so there's still tremendous need, even when we've exhausted all that we can do. And you know where this is going. You can guess, right? I'm going to turn this over into God's jurisdiction and saying, God, we need help, and we need your help, because the kind of help we need, nothing else and no one else, and even the combined efforts of all of us, even if we did work together, even if we were, let's say, worldwide bipartisan or tripartisan, we still couldn't get it done. And so starting this morning and for a number of weeks, we're going to be in the book of Exodus. And I don't know if you've been in there lately or ever. I mean, we all know something, I think, of the book of Exodus. If you don't understand Exodus, there's much of the New Testament you don't understand. And so it's not, well, that was the Old Testament. Listen, whether it's Old Covenant or New Covenant, God has always been the same. God's character has never changed. Don't say, well, that was law, today is grace. That simplifies it way too much, although there's some truth. And really, when I look at Exodus, and this is the way I condense, if I was going to think about Exodus, this is my thought. We need help and God helps. That's to me Exodus, and how do we play out how God helps? He doesn't always help the way we want him to help. He doesn't always help the way that we would help if we were God, but we do need help, more than what we'll ever know. I mean, even in this church, it's been just, so-and-so's died, and so-and-so's died, and so-and-so was ill, and so-and-so is going to have an operation this week, and so-and-so, and sometimes I keep seeing this stuff and hearing this stuff, and we do some visits, but it just... And we just need help. Now, the book of Exodus is the second book in Scripture, following the book of, thank you so much, right? You're there. It's following the book of Genesis. It's a continuation of Genesis. Actually, the book of Exodus, the first word is and. In your English versions, it might be now or these things, but really the word is and. And so, as you get into Exodus, the people, the Israeli people, going through stuff, they're thinking back and what all happened in Genesis, what went on back there, and how can what went on there help us to get through this now? And sometimes that's what we need. What happened back there? Maybe it was a time in your life when you were dazed and confused, and you didn't know if you could take another step, you could take another breath. You were knocked off your feet. You took a sock in the gut, a punch in the nose, and you just didn't know how can I get out of bed in the morning, and how can I redeem this day? How can I continue? And you think back, and you go, well, I was able to, and God saw to it, and people came around. But sometimes we need to go back further than your own life. And that's what Exodus helps us do, as we see the Israeli people looking back. So here's the last verse in the book of Genesis. It says, so Joseph died at the age of 110 years. And Joseph was like the second guy in charge of the nation of Egypt. He was a Hebrew, and you know sort of the story, sold into slavery, was put into prison, and God miraculously brought him out of prison and put him in charge, and his family came down and visited. And you remember the lineage, though? Abraham and Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. So as Genesis comes to a close, that stuff's gone. And it says also that Joseph and all of his brothers and all of that generation has died. That's in the past. Now, a new king arose over Egypt who didn't know Joseph. And it's not like he didn't know of Joseph, but this is about 100 years later. Now, it doesn't tell you that. So at the end of the book of Genesis, and here about verse 7 or verse 8 in Exodus, about 100 years has gone by. And so the Hebrew people haven't had like a representative in the Egyptian government. It's just Egypt, and it's just their pharaohs and their kings. And the king now doesn't pay attention or doesn't honor, doesn't recognize who Joseph was. Here again, it's 100 years ago. That was then. This is now. And this king, he looks around, he sees all the Israeli people, they're multiplying. They're having kid after kid after kid after kid, and he goes, I think there's more of them than there are of us. And he's thinking, and you know, they're foreigners. They've been here for a while, but they don't still belong here. And what happens if, let's say, another army invades us? They may side with the invaders. They may overthrow us. They may take us captive. They may leave this land. Then what are we going to do? So the king is scared that the Israeli people are becoming too powerful. So I got to do something here. So he says, I need a wise plan. And so this was his plan. This is plan A. So they appointed taskmasters over them, that is the Hebrew people, to afflict them with hard labor. He goes, that's what we're going to do. We're going to work them into the ground. See, the whole thought is to reduce the Hebrew population. So let's work them so hard that some of them may die, and those that don't die, they're not going to have the energy or the inclination to have any kids. They're not going to even be able to repopulate. And if they do, they won't have the energy to even raise kids. So second, they're not going to even want to. They're not going to have the energy to. And even if they do, they're not going to be able to do it very well. So let's make life so hard for them that they basically drop dead or don't have any desire for anything else. He goes, that's what we'll do. That's a good plan. Well, here's the result of plan A. The more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied. And the more they spread out, so that they were in dread of the sons of Israel. We're making life hard, and what do? They make me look bad. I'm not such a smart king after all. So I know, I'll do plan B. Here's plan B. He's talking to the midwives. When you're helping, a midwife help women give birth, when you're helping the Hebrew women to give birth, and you see them upon the birth stool, if it's a son, you shall put him to death. Toss him in the river. But if it's a daughter, then you let her live. This is infanticide. So you kill all the boys. We can keep the girls because we can bring them into the Egyptian culture, and we can have them married in, and so they can help us repopulate. But take the boys who are a military threat and get rid of them. So not only is life hard on you, not only are we working you almost to death, that you don't, back then you didn't have like ultrasound, so you didn't know after 4 or 5 months what the gender was. So, and sometimes women think, well, I know the way that it dropped, the way, sometimes women think they know, and maybe they do, I don't know. But back then, there's no way to really know. I mean, keep your fingers crossed, pray for the best, but imagine not knowing up until you give birth if your child has been said it's going to be able to live or die based on the gender. You're sitting there, it's more than getting the room ready and all this stuff. Are they even going to let the kid live? And so that's what the Pharaoh said to the Hebrew midwives. Well, here's the midwives. Basically, they tell the king, go take a hike. See, the midwives feared God more than they feared the king. Isn't that good? I mean, that's good for them. We're not going to do that. I know what you said, and I know you're the king, but, take a leap off a cliff, so to speak. And so they let the boys live, and they came up with a lie that, you know what, they're so hardy. By the time we get there to help them, they've already had the kids, so boom, they're gone. So don't blame us. We're doing all we can. It wasn't true, but they feared God more than they feared, I would say, for their own lives. And let them all live. Here's the result of Plan B. God was good to the midwives, and the people multiplied, and they became very mighty. I mean, they were tough, they were rugged. So, Plan A doesn't work, Plan B doesn't work. Here is Pharaoh Plan C. He commanded all his people, not just midwives, all the Egyptians. You say, every son who is born, you cast into the river, into the Nile. And every daughter you keep alive. So now, like it's law, you watch out. And you see a Hebrew woman and you think maybe she's carrying a kid, you keep an eye out. And you know when she's about to give birth, and you try to ascertain, is that a boy or is that a girl? And if it's a boy, you know what? You do it. The whole nation now, it's a law. You kill the kid. Toss the kid in the river. Keep the girls alive, kill all the boys. This is nuts. Life for us isn't easy, or it's not easy very long. But can you imagine living as a slave? You're told what, you're told when. And then every time a woman gets pregnant, we don't know if they're going to be able to keep the kid or not. And it's a law, basically. If it's a boy, he's gone. Hard to imagine. Don't think we can. Can I tell you that Plan C didn't work very well either? They just kept on multiplying. A couple things here. And number one, Plan C, it didn't work either. Never mistake hardship as the absence of God's presence or his blessing. Some people, just as soon as life gets hard and those things pay them a visit, there's a conclusion that God isn't here or God's not blessing us. It's easy to wonder, where is God in all of this? Or, God, are you paying attention here? Don't you realize what I'm going through? God, don't you know that this solid single thought never leaves my mind? I can't turn it on and off like a switch. Don't you know that I can hardly sleep at night? Don't you know that I wake up numerous times during the night and can't fall back? I walk around the house, I go out and lay in the chair for a while. But the thought just doesn't leave me alone. It's like it's a haunting thought. God, don't you know that I don't have an appetite anymore? The food doesn't taste good. God, don't you know that I'm losing weight? It's not because I want to lose weight. It's just because that here I'm anxious all the time and nothing tastes good, and so I don't eat much, and so I'm not only am I not getting much food, I'm not getting much sleep, and I have this going on, and I don't know. And I can say you're good all the time, and all the time you're good, and it's not that I don't believe that, but I'm going to tell you something. I don't know if I can continue with this. And it's easy to think that at this point, God doesn't care, or God isn't doing or will not do anything about it. It's easy to think, you know what? If that's what I get for, in these days, being a Christian or going to church, better to stay home. It's not working. Christianity is not working. And you want to call down, God to do this and do that. Look, listen, never mistake hardship as the absence of God's presence or blessing. Second thing, God's people are never alone, even when life hurts. It's sort of the same as number one. It seems like we are. It feels like we can't perceive that God is with us, but we're never alone. In the middle of the night, when you wake up and you can't get back to sleep, you're not alone. Even if you're in the house by yourself, you're not alone. Hurt is not an indicator that God has left or God has abandoned. It just isn't. God's people are never, ever alone. Number 3 is this: never mistake God's silence for God's absence. You see, here in chapter 1, because basically we went through chapter 1 there, never did God have a town meeting with the Israeli people. Never he said, gather around, folks, let me tell you something. Never did once did God text, did God tweet, did God call. Never did check out the website. You know that's crazy, but never did God let them know, give them a clue as what was happening. You said, well, it would have been nice. I don't know what it would have been, but he didn't. In spite of Pharaoh's plans A, B, and C, God was still at work on their behalf, yet he never told them. We don't see anything. He never said a word. Don't ever think that God always needs to be in this audible kind of mode where we physically hear him with his ears. And I'm not saying that we don't sense him, we don't hear him in our heart or in our spirit. I'm not saying that, but don't ever think that God has to speak like I'm speaking and you need physical ears to pick up his message, because you don't. God doesn't often speak like we speak. He can and he has, but don't think that is the norm. It's never been the norm. Never. Never mistake God's silence for, because he's just as much there when he speaks as when he does not. He caused the people to multiply, and he established families. You could see him at work, but you couldn't see him. And you couldn't hear him. It changes nothing. Now in chapter 2, I'm going to sort of condense what happens in chapter 2. This baby boy is born to a Hebrew family. You know what should have happened? Should have been cast into the river, loaded downstream, and died. Well, they conceal him for 3 months, but after 3 months, we can't hide him anymore. So they put him in this basket. The actual Hebrew word is ark. Interesting, right? Just like Noah's ark, they put him in a mini ark in this basket, and they wrapped him up, and they put him in the Nile River among the reeds. And the baby sister's kind of hanging around, seeing what happens. And the king or Pharaoh's daughter comes, she comes down to bathe in the river and looks over there, sees a basket. What's that? She goes over and says, it's a Hebrew baby boy. What she should have done was throw him back in the river and watch him go downstream, but she didn't. She cries out, and the baby sister comes, oh, can I help? Can I maybe get a Hebrew woman to nurse him for you? And she goes, well, yeah, go and do that. So she goes and gets her and the baby's mom to come and nurse her baby. And then Pharaoh's daughter says, well, when you're done nursing him, after a number of months, come and bring him to me in the palace so I can raise him. And by the way, since you're doing this for me, I'm going to pay you. It's amazing, right? He should have been killed, and she's getting paid by Pharaoh's daughter to do what she shouldn't be doing. And you think like God is doing something here? And of course we're going, that's amazing. So this next one, God is always working his plan among his people. Always. See, no one thought, well, God doesn't tell him, this little baby's Moses. He's going to be the leader of your people. He doesn't tell him nothing. Just because God's not telling doesn't mean God's not working. He's always working his plan among his people. And I'm going to go, can we get to the place where we don't have to know what God's up to know he never leaves his people alone? We don't have to know what. We just have to know who he is. And he's always working his stuff among his people. Can we always trust God's working his plan? Can you trust that God is working his plan in you? Yeah, you right now, today. And you may not know what it is. And you don't always have to know what it is. Just know he's working his plan. And for me to know God is working his plan in me and through me. And it's always that way. He's doing a work in you to do a work through you. Oftentimes we just want to see results. God can, but not often does he do results without working in people and through people. God's working his plan in and through this church. He is. He wants to work his plan in and through every single church, every single follower of Christ, every single one. Never think that my life is for naught, or I missed it. Way back then, I should have done this, but I didn't do that, and so therefore, listen, whether you did or didn't, we can all see mistakes in our past, right? Every single one. We all have regrets. Of course we do. That doesn't mean that God can't do great things through you and in you. God's always working his plan. Now, this baby is born in Exodus chapter 2, verse 2. In Exodus 2, verse 11, he is now an adult. And when we look over into Acts chapter 7, what we find out that from verse 2 to verse 11, guess how much time has gone by? 40 years. You don't know it. You say baby, adult, and we keep reading. No, 40 years has gone by So they're going, 40 years? That's a long time. It is. And nothing has changed in Egypt. The taskmasters are still at work. There's still this edict out there that if it's a baby boy, toss him in the Nile. 40 years. Yeah, God, how come you haven't shown up? God, how come you haven't come on how come you haven't changed things? And so now Moses is an adult, and he sees an Egyptian taskmaster being really, really cruel to a Hebrew. So you know what he does? He looks to the left, looks to the right, strikes the Egyptian down, kills him. Kills the guy. Next day, he tries to put a stop to a fight, and someone says, "Who do you think you are? I just saw you kill somebody yesterday, and you're trying to stop a fight? You killed somebody yesterday." He buried him in the sand, but still he couldn't conceal the death. So Moses takes off. He's on escape because now Pharaoh wants to kill him, and he takes off to another land. Now he's a foreigner. He's on the run. He's a fugitive. And you might think, well, that's the end of it. I mean, how many leaders, how many good leaders were once murderers? You know, a number of years ago, not that long, a few years ago, I candidated to become pastor of this church. Because some of you are wondering, how did you ever get here? I candidated, right? Phone calls, resumes. I came. Remember, some of you remember, I actually came, did the process. And you know what? You all have the audacity to do. You went and ran background checks on me. You did. And I was thinking, does that include South Dakota? No, I didn't say that. Does that include the 80s, right? Does that like go overseas? It was like this, I don't know, worldwide, at least nationwide background check. You want to know why they did that? I'm still amazed. They want to make sure I haven't done certain things that they're going to go, I don't know. We may not, I mean, he can't even dress himself right? I told the story, my interview that I had with all the elders and stuff, I wore my shirt inside out. Halfway through it, my wife leans over, go to the bathroom and turn your shirt back. And you know, if that's not a sign that I can't function, I don't know what is, right? But they would have found, oh, you know what, he committed a homicide back in whenever. I mean, God's forgiven him and da-da-da, but I don't know here. They might have thought, maybe we should keep looking. Or, you know, I guess God can't use me now because look what I've done. It doesn't get much worse than actually taking the life of another person. And that would legitimately, and I would understand if I would have done that you said, hey, thanks, but no thanks, we're going to keep looking here. It would have been understandable, I think, for Moses. Well, you know, what can God do with me now? I am a murderer. I was raised in a royal palace, but I went out and I know I shouldn't have done it, and now I'm a foreigner in another land. And what God does is gives him a wife, gives him a son. But you know what he's doing for the next 40 years? He's a shepherd. He's taking care of sheep. Oh, that's great leadership training, right? There you go. Here's what you do. Just look after these sheep. Now, getting near the end of chapter 2. Now, it came about in the course of those many days. From the beginning of chapter 2 to the end of chapter 2, you know how much time has gone by? right at 80 years. See, as you get into chapter 3, the burning bush thing, we know it's been 80 years. That's a few verses, and I think the time frame is pretty close there. I can't say exactly 80, but assume it's close. It's about 80 years. You know what happens in 80 years? Some people have been born, some people have been died, and they never saw God do anything. They're like, I didn't, my dad didn't, grandpa, grandma, they didn't. We've been under the taskmasters for a long time. Who knows how many baby boys were thrown into the Nile? We don't know. They all didn't because they kept multiplying, but maybe some did, probably some did. Over 80 years. You might think, I'm wondering if there's a God at all. We've been praying and praying and praying. And as far as we can see, He hasn't done anything. He hasn't gave us any, He hasn't showed us a way out. He's done nothing. It's a long time. And here's the end of chapter 2. It says, and the sons of Israel sighed because of their bondage, and they cried out. And I believe when they cried out, they literally cried out. I believe they wailed. As if when one suffers grief, and maybe you've been there, or maybe you're there. It's that. It's not that they said in a loud voice, but under control. No. They cried out. And their cry for help because of their bondage rose up to God. And I don't know exactly what it said, because it didn't tell it. It just says they cried out. But I'm wondering if they said, God, I can't take this anymore. I feel as though internally I am dying. I feel physically I am dying. I have seen many people die, and I can't live with it anymore. I don't think I can get up in the morning. I don't think I can get out of bed. I don't think I can take one more step. And it rose up to God. So God heard their groaning. And be careful of this word remembered. God remembered His covenant. Remember when it comes to God, never is like, oh, God had forgotten. Oh, it was on the back burner in God's mind. Oh, boy, gosh, I need some reminders. God never needs a reminder. It means that God leaned in. And God is keeping His covenant current. God remembered his covenant, and the covenant could be said to be an agreement. Actually, the word covenant means to cut. They would cut an animal in half, and it was quite bloody. God remembered His covenant with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, and God saw the sons of Israel, and God took notice of them. See, God's people are never alone. He hears and He responds to our prayers. Sometimes it's 40 years. Sometimes it's 80 years. Sometimes in our lifetime, we never see what He is up to historically in its totality. We have been born, we lived, we died, and we never saw what God was finally up to. We have what I want to call in one sense we can't help it, but we need to help it. We have an American mindset when it comes to God. You say, well, we're Americans. I get it. One of my wife and I is one of our favorite movies. It has some language, but it's called The Devil's Own. If you ever saw it, it's Harrison Ford and is a New York City cop, and Brad Pitt is an IRA, and that's not individual retirement account. That's Irish Republican Army. I remember when the first time I went to Scotland with my wife now, and we're downtown shopping, and there's all this yellow tape around an apartment or a department store. And I said, what's going on? She goes, oh, that's IRA. And to her, it was like, another bomb threat. And the Scottish people, they get, so, I mean, it was like nothing, like I think it's going to rain, something like that. She was like, yeah, it happens all the time. They're always calling in bomb threats, and they're having the police, like, does a bomb ever go off? She's almost never, rarely. So we just go about our day like that. Well, Brad Pitt was an IRA guy. He was coming over to get weapons to go back to Ireland so they can continue the warfare over there. And at some point, Harrison Ford is trying to say, well, things will work out and it'll be okay and hang in there, Brad. And he says to Harrison, I don't do a good accent, but this isn't an American story. He goes, it's an Irish one. And what he means is, so many Irish stories don't have happy endings. You Americans, all your stories, in one sense, and they lived happily ever after. And he's saying, if you're from Ireland, you know better. And Harrison doesn't know what to do with that. Oh, he lived to fight another. Can I tell you, that's not the biblical story? Eventually, someday, yeah. But while you're walking this earth, don't read too much of America into the Bible. God's people are never alone. He hears and responds to our prayers, but don't you think, and don't you grab at a couple of verses hanging around and try to make that normative. That you're going to live happily ever after, that God's going to take care of this and that. You may go and I may go to our grave without something being resolved. I was over in Israel about a year ago, and a lot of things went on, but the one thing that I think really stuck home isn't what I saw, it was what the pastor, leader, guide said. He said the Israeli people, basically their history is one of suffering. The one thing they've taught the world is how to suffer well. I'm going, gotcha. What they've taught the world is how to suffer well. And with that, the Israeli people, as they remember Exodus. And they remember Genesis. It's ingrained in them. And so should we, so we can understand what God does in and after Christ. See, delay doesn't mean no, it only means not yet, because God is working His plan His way, not our plan our way. And that's the only thing delay means. Finally, we need help. And God helps. Because God's people are never alone. Would you pray with me? Lord, thank you for the fact that you are the great helper. And you will never leave us alone. You're always working your plan. It doesn't always make sense. We can't always see progress, but we know who the God who is in charge, And we will trust in that and not what we see. Thank you for being a Lord, a God who helps those who need help, and we sure need help. A God who never leaves us alone. He never could. He will never forsake us. That's just the way He is. And for that we thank you this morning in Christ's name. Amen.